talking, so just as a reminder, and you should have gotten the recording notification just now. But if you are not speaking, again, please put yourself on mute so we can hear everything that Julia and Amy are saying. And as we go through the demo, please feel free to go ahead and post your questions in the chat for any Q&A questions that you have. We're going to go through the questions throughout the demo. So if you have questions about something that Julia is doing in that moment, please feel free to go ahead and ask it so Amy can read it out loud and we can get that answered for you as we go through the whole process. We also will have a few minutes at the end to go over some additional Q&A, but like I said, feel free to just type those along as we're going through. That said, if you do feel more comfortable sending your question privately, you can find either Amy's name or Julia's name or my own name in the chat feature if you want to send us a private message not seen to the whole participant audience. So with that said, those are kind of the logistics for today's webinar, and I am excited to have today from UCLA's Teaching Kitchen. We have a couple of great folks here who will be leading us through the webinar. Julia Rotten is a chef and culinary arts coordinator at the UCLA Teaching Kitchen. She's been a chef in LA for over 15 years and has her degree in teaching. And then we also have Amy Fisher here as well, who's a registered dietitian with a BS in nutrition science from Cornell and her MS in clinical nutrition from Rush University, and has been an RD for 26 years. So with that said, Julia and Amy, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to have you both, and I will turn it over to both of you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Welcome everybody to the UCLA Teaching Kitchen. I am actually here in the kitchen facility on our campus. It's a lovely day and there's sadly not as many people around as we would normally like, but it's a joy that we can be here and kind of share our space with all of you. So welcome. We're really excited that we can take part in this series and help be a part of this, especially this pillar on fitness and nutrition. Amy and I, this is two of our favorite things. So like Kathleen said, we're going to do a really simple and straightforward recipe today. I'm going to handle the cooking aspects, how to make all of these things delicious, and Amy's going to teach us why they're so good for us. So without further ado, I kind of want to get started so that we don't miss any quality time together. The first thing I can tell you, the most important thing when you're starting to cook, if you are deciding to use a recipe, is to read the whole recipe all the way through. Try to start with those ingredients, read the method, get your head wrapped around what you're doing for the day, just because I can't tell you, even for me, how many times I get to the point halfway through a recipe and I realize I don't have exactly the ingredient that it's calling for, or that pan that I want to be using right now in this moment is dirty somewhere and I've got to stop everything and go clean it. So troubleshooting those kinds of things at the beginning by reading your recipe through and gathering all of your ingredients and gathering all of your equipment to start out goes a really long way to making the process a lot more fun and just more efficient and a lot easier to clean up in the long run, which I can't tell you how much I hate doing dishes. So the more efficient and practical you can make the cleanup process, the better. So our recipe that we're doing today is a balsamic chicken and roasted vegetable sheet pan dinner. I am a huge fan of a sheet pan dinner. I don't know if you guys have tried these yet. They're kind of a big trend right now. It doesn't mean that they're new. Grandma was doing sheet pan dinners before it was cool. You know, it's one of the easiest ways to make a really hearty, healthy, cooked dinner without having to stand at a stove all night long and worry about sweating, or we all have more important things to do, right? So getting this kind of
many pans, it's just one.
Yes, this is why it's totally my favorite, Amy. Thank you for pointing that out. One major thing that you're going to be washing at the end, and if you're like me, you line your baking sheet with a little bit of foil or paper, and so it's even easier to clean. Everything goes onto the sheet pan in the long run in this recipe, and then it all goes into the oven, so you can go ahead and get the family ready for dinner, shower after the long day of work, but you've got something really delicious that's going to be waiting for you in the end. So looking at this recipe, we start off with a little bit of a marinade. There's some ingredients: balsamic vinegar, honey, garlic, smoked paprika, and olive oil, dried oregano, and salt and pepper. Those are going to be going together nicely, and we're going to rub our chicken down. That's a basic marinade. You could marinate your chicken for hours as long as you don't cover it with too much salt. But you can let that sit for hours and hours. If you want to be really on the ball today, you can get your chicken in the marinade in the morning, and then when you come home at the end of the day, it's going to be even more full of flavor, and delicious juices are going to kind of penetrate into the meat. Again, though, if you're putting a little bit of salt, be careful with the salt. Salt can kind of turn protein into a jerky because it breaks down the protein, and that can be good. That can also be really not so good. So the longer it sits in a salty solution, just sort of depends on the situation and what you're dealing with. So for this situation, I would end up using the salt and pepper a little bit later. Go ahead and marinate it in the garlic and oregano and smoked paprika, all those delicious flavors. As Amy, I'm sure, using all of the flavor is a really great way to cook and to season our food without having to go overboard on the stuff that's not necessarily good for us, right, Amy?
Definitely. Those seasonings go a long way to adding flavor without having to use a lot of sodium or salt.
It's really, really, really helpful if you've got certain people in your family or you need to kind of cut certain things out. I know that salt is not great for us in abundance. We tend to, I think, in this country, eat a little bit too much salt. I know I'm on that train, so we want to be careful. So I'm going to use
1 teaspoon has 2,300 milligrams, which is the recommended amount that we try to limit to every day. So yeah, cutting back on the salt that you add in recipes or at the table can certainly be helpful.
Yeah. But we still want our food to taste really good, right, everyone? So to do that, we use a lot of other things that add good things to our food rather than making it bland or boring. But none of these are going to add too much bad stuff. It's all really good for us, especially when you choose healthy, good ingredients. So once you've made a marinade, we're going to rub our chicken in it, set that aside for just a little bit while we prep some vegetables. I'm going to demonstrate a few things that I like to show. People tend to have similar struggles when they're cutting certain vegetables. So I'm going to demonstrate the bell peppers, the onion, some garlic tricks and tips, and then we're going to get all of this onto the sheet pan and into the oven. And that's the fun part, because then while that's working, we're going to have some time to learn some really great stuff from Amy and excuse me, answer some more questions and kind of get a little Q&A going. So we want to get this into the oven. Stop listening to me ramble on, and if there are any questions that pop up on anything that I'm covering, please, Amy, don't hesitate to interrupt me.
Okay. And don't worry, you'll receive the recipe if you haven't already.
Yeah, definitely. The recipe will get mailed out again. If it didn't get sent out originally, then you'll get it after the fact for sure. And we'll also put a link in the chat to our website, because we have tons and tons of recipes in a catalog there that we would love to share with everybody. So you can all have access to that at the end as well. This is another thing, just because I hate doing dishes, and it just seems really practical to me. I make almost all of my marinades, dressings, sauces, when I can, in the container that I can keep it in the fridge, because if I make more, then I can use it later on. It just goes right into the fridge. I don't have to get a bowl dirty. It's a whole process. So this marinade is really simple and straightforward. We've got 1/3 cup of balsamic vinegar. It's the first word in the title to the recipe, right? Balsamic chicken. We want to make sure that we've got a good amount of balsamic flavor. So it's a hearty 1/3 cup. It is going to end up cooking down. I'm going to demonstrate how we can turn this marinade into a glaze after the fact. So I've got 1/3 cup poured into my little jar container, something that I can just use to store it in afterwards. And this is a really great recipe for additional meal prep in your lives. Don't think that this is only good on this chicken and vegetable. This balsamic marinade is really, really great on fish. It's great tossed on other types of vegetables for grilling. It's really great as a salad dressing. So you can use a lot of different things with this exact marinade recipe. It goes a long way in your life. So make a lot of it, and it lasts in your refrigerator in an airtight container for couple of weeks at least, and it's really delicious. I'm going with 2 tablespoons of honey here. This is definitely what we would still consider added sugar, right, Amy?
Yes, even though people consider honey maybe more natural, it is broken down to glucose just like table sugar. So you do want to be careful about how much honey or any kind of natural sweetener that you're using.
And that's really kind of one of the joys of making these kinds of things for yourself, because you'll notice you need far less to make it taste just as good than they put into it in the store. So when you're buying yourself a balsamic vinegar from the supermarket, it's likely going to be using high fructose corn syrup, or even maybe 3 other different kinds of sugars to help make it taste good and make it last a long time. And the less you can do with that, the better. So making it yourself with a little bit of honey, it makes a big difference in the long run. I've got about half a tablespoon of minced garlic that I'm adding into this marinade. I am going to still demonstrate some garlic, so don't worry, you didn't miss out on all of the fun there. But I just wanted to get ahead on this marinade so I can get the chicken soaking. So the garlic, the honey, the balsamic vinegar, and then it's smoked paprika has also been around for quite a long time. It's very big in Spanish cuisine and a lot of other kinds of cooking, but it's getting like a new lease in life. It's sort of trendy lately, and so you can find it at a lot of stores, pretty much most of the major supermarkets, but definitely Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and Sprouts will have it in their spice section. It adds a lot of savory flavor. The smoky quality of it does change the flavor. So if you just have regular paprika, that's okay. No stress. It's still going to be really, really delicious recipe, but the smokiness of this takes it to a whole nother level. So if you get yourself a small container of smoked paprika, it lasts a very long time. You can probably go a year or more before it loses its potency and its smokiness. So it's a nice thing to add to your pantry if you don't already have it, if you haven't used it. It's just a really natural smokiness rather than, I don't know if any of you have ever used or experienced kind of like artificial smokiness, like liquid smoke. It definitely is different. This paprika is real paprika that has been smoked, and it's delicious. So I've got a half a teaspoon of smoked paprika going into here, and then I'm going to be doing a whole tablespoon of dried oregano. It's a main component of flavor. It really helps bring out the Italian qualities. Dried oregano is one of our favorite Italian herbs. If you have fresh oregano growing in your garden, because it basically grows like a weed, use it. I would just say, as a little side note to everybody, dried herbs are a lot more potent than fresh ones. So I'm using a tablespoon of dried oregano. If you were using fresh, I would go ahead and bump that up to 2. Just because the dried herbs have been dried, the flavor is really condensed and potent inside the leaves, and so you need a lot less if it's dried. Same thing with garlic powder versus fresh garlic, right? The garlic powder is going to be pretty strong, but the fresh garlic, you'd need a little bit more just because it's been condensed. Okay,
Julia,
and then the next thing, go
I have
ahead.
one quick question. Could you substitute monk fruit for honey? Would that taste okay? Would that be an okay substitute?
That is an excellent question, and I have no idea. I am not in many years of kitchens, and especially cooking in Los Angeles with so many different alternative foods and ingredients. I have never used that.
I'm not real familiar with monk fruit sugar either. I would suggest even just Googling like how to substitute that for honey.
If that's what you have and that's what you use, and it's sort of a sweetened syrup, then I'm going to say on the general technical, yes, you can absolutely use it. Brown rice syrup, maple syrup, agave nectar. You could use a lot of different kinds of sugar syrups. It will taste different just because honey has a particular flavor, and I'm sure monk fruit, just like agave and brown rice syrup, all have slightly different actual tastes to them, so it might taste different. But the fact that honey is not actually the main ingredient here, it gets really drowned out by the flavor of the balsamic, which is very, very potent, really strong flavor, lovely strong flavor, and the garlic, right? So I imagine it would end up just tasting like a sweetened balsamic marinade, very similar to what this is going to end up being. It might have a light like hint of something else, but I'm sure it would work wonderfully. And now I'm going to go home and buy some of that and try it, because I love finding out new ingredients that in all my years I still haven't worked with. You know, it's like driving through your neighborhood and realizing you've never been on this street before. I love that. So thank you for that question and that introduction, and I hope that you do try it, and I hope that that it works. So I just like to put, this is why I like to make my marinades and dressings in the jar, because I just put a lid on and I give a little shake, do a little dance, and I'm done. I don't have to even get a whisk dirty. I don't have to get a bowl dirty. And if I don't use all of this on my chicken tonight, I can save it and put it on my salad or my turkey wrap tomorrow. So I have got my chicken thighs here sort of cleaned up and rinsed, ready to go. I will note, if you're getting good quality chicken, you shouldn't have to rinse it off. If you're getting chicken that has this kind of like sliminess on it and you are instinctively drawn to want to rinse it off, that is not necessarily good quality chicken. So I would probably not buy that next time. The recipe for this does say to remove the skin. This recipe was originally written for one of our special weight loss groups, focusing especially on trying to reduce the intake of calories and certain things. So if you want to live life to your fullest tonight, don't take the skin off. It's delicious. It's really delicious. I'm not going to kid you. I'm a chef. Amy's the health expert. The skin is great. And so once in a while, it's a Amy, you can tell us more. These animal fats aren't that bad for, like, we're learning more and more, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a special occasion to occasionally have the skin, and it also depends on your health concerns, right? If you have high cholesterol and you really need to watch the saturated fat, you might not only remove the skin, but you might choose to use a chicken breast instead. Someone asked if they could do the chicken breast. You certainly could. Chicken breasts have about a third less of the fat than you'll find in the thigh. The thighs tend to be a little bit more moist, and so oftentimes people find them a little tastier and not as dry. But both the breast and the thigh provide a good source of protein, and then it's sort of a matter of, you know, how closely you feel like you need to watch your saturated fat intake. They're pretty much the same in terms of iron, sodium, calories, you know. Thighs are a little bit higher in calories because of the higher fat content, but they're pretty equivalent other than like the saturated fat content.
And yeah, great question. Amy, thank you for pointing that out. You can definitely make this with the chicken breast. And when you get the recipe, if you haven't received that already, there is a note that you can use the chicken breast instead, and just to cut the vegetables maybe a little bit smaller, because with white meat chicken, your cook time is going to be shortened. The dark meat cooks longer, also meat on the bone cooks longer, and I here have chicken thighs on the bone, so they're going to take a little bit longer in the oven, up to 35-40 minutes, whereas a chicken breast is probably 20. So you'd want to cut your vegetables a little bit smaller to accommodate for that, because by the time the chicken breast is done, your veggies might not be cooked through. So that's sort of the concept of cooking it all on one sheet pan. You have to adjust for the cook time. So breasts would be far shorter cook time. So you just adjust that by cutting your veggies into real small bite-sized chunks, and then they'll get cooked up in just the right amount of time. I am at this point adding just a pinch of salt and pepper both. And the chicken has been well rubbed and well coated in our delicious garlic and oregano balsamic marinade. And then you'll notice, hopefully, I still have a fair amount of that marinade. Now, today I'm going to demonstrate in a bit how to cook that down so you can make kind of a little glaze. It's a little bonus to our recipe today. But in the meantime, I just want to get some veggies prepped and get this into the oven really quick so we can move ahead. This is the fun part, because I don't know, I just love like chopping things up and throwing it in a bowl and walking away. It's so easy and fun. I have got one thing already done, and I hope you have already noticed I've got two cameras so you can see me, but I'm not that interesting. Above me, I have a second camera. So as I start to cut things and demonstrate things here, if you wanted to, you can on your screen pin my overhead camera so that you can look at in more detail of what I have got going on my cutting board. I do also want to point this out because I am a clean, efficient cook. I keep a little thing next to me wherever I am when I'm cooking at home, especially because I hate walking back and forth to the trash can. It's just it's an interruption that I don't need while I'm doing things. So all of my trash goes into one little container nearby, and then I can keep myself organized and clean. Cleaning as you go when you cook is a lifesaver. So I have got some large diced eggplant. This just came from a regular globe eggplant, the sort of traditional Italian big purple guys. And I chunked it up into fairly large pieces because I'm going to have a longer cook time with my chicken thighs. And I laid these out on paper towels, and I sprinkled with a little tiny bit of kosher salt. I use kosher salt for all my cooking. It's just the salt that I always have around. You can use sea salt, table salt, but getting a little bit of salt on your cut up eggplant will help to extract the water. These paper towels were completely dry when I first put the eggplant on. Now they are soaked through with eggplant water, and my eggplant itself is going to roast up a lot nicer. It's going to be a lot less slimy. So those of you who might have issues with slime, I never used to like eggplant as a child because it kind of felt like, I don't know, it just felt like slime between my teeth. I could kind of like squeeze it. I'm a very like full of imagery. But you don't want that kind of a mouthfeel. We want it to taste like a really good bite to it. We want it to taste like a roasted vegetable. So drying it out goes a really long way. You don't have to do this. You don't have to. But it's a nice extra step to making it nicer, just as a little tip when you're working with eggplant. So I'm just going to put my diced eggplant here into a mixing bowl, to which I will add in all of my other prep vegetables. And this bowl is basically going to be like, this and the chicken bowl are my two dishes I'm going to have to do tonight. Love it. All right, so we've got carrots in this recipe. We've got zucchini in this recipe. We have got some bell pepper, onion, cherry tomatoes, and mushrooms. All right, the mushrooms I also already cut. One tip about mushrooms, try not to soak them in water. I know that they are dirty and we want to clean them, but soaking them or rinsing them in lots and lots of water is actually going to make your mushrooms slimy. So take a damp paper towel, wring all the loose water out, but a wet paper towel, and wipe your mushrooms down. That's how you clean mushrooms. If they're really, really caked in like a mud, then it's not coming off, then you can go ahead and rinse that in a colander, but then try to dry it off very well, maybe in a salad spinner or letting it air dry underneath a good ventilated space. But when you drench and soak your mushrooms, you're going to get a really soggy after effect, whether you use them raw or cooked. It just doesn't create the kind of texture that we like. So a damp paper towel is how we have been taught to clean your mushrooms. Just wipe down the edges, remove any of that loose soil, and you're good to go. I just quartered mine because I had large cremini mushrooms, and so I cut them into large chunks. I'm just keeping everything in a similar size so that when it cooks generally around the same time.
So Julia, we have a couple questions about the eggplant. Do you rinse it to remove the extra salt? And also, how long do you let the eggplant sit with the salt on it?
I let the eggplant sit for about an hour and it did wonders, but you don't even have to, maybe 20 minutes. So like do the eggplant first, and then while you're chopping all your other veggies and getting the rest of the recipe going, it will, even that 20 minutes will help a lot in terms of extracting the water. It depends on what you're going to be using your eggplant for to rinse it and how much salt you used. I used about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt to sprinkle over the entire eggplant. And I'm just going to put a little bit less salt now onto my roasted vegetables when I toss them together. If you are doing like an eggplant parmesan and you've got those big thick strips of eggplant and you put a decent amount of salt on those, then yeah, you would want to kind of rinse the surface salt away for sure. It doesn't really soak in and make the meat of the eggplant salty, so that won't hurt it. But the longer you let it sit.
If you rinse it off, you need to dry it then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and you would then like let it air dry, sort of let it sit back on some paper towels or something. But you're not using that much salt. In the long run, it should be just a pinch, just a teeny tiny sprinkle over the top will be all that you need. You could just lay it out on paper towels, and that will be already a step in the right direction. The salt just helps to extract even more of the water because it dehydrates the plant.
So I have a quiz question for Julia. She should know this because we've gone over it before. What is the special thing about mushrooms in terms of the nutrients? Contains a certain vitamin.
D.
Vitamin D.
Yay!
Yep. You got it. So what I find interesting about mushrooms is that the gills, when exposed to the sun, can produce vitamin D. Similar to our skin, when it's exposed to UV light, we produce vitamin D. And so vegetables don't typically have much in the way of vitamin D, but mushrooms can. And you can buy them already exposed to UV, or you can set them out on your porch maybe for a little bit, and it actually will boost the vitamin D content of your mushrooms, which is kind of interesting.
Super fascinating. It's a great great also little project if anybody out there is looking for more things to do with those kids who are all at home. Little UV light exposure to mushrooms and doing a little report on the D content. There's your science fair project. So carrots, I want to point out, I don't peel carrots. I just wash them very well. The peel is good for you. I mean, it's just more carrot, so I don't necessarily want to throw that away. Plus, when it gets roasted, it doesn't look dried out like the exterior of a carrot sometimes does. So it doesn't matter. It's just all going to go into the oven. And I just cut those into about 1/2-inch thick coins, which is what we call that. You're all smart enough to figure out why. And zucchini, I've got 2 medium-sized zucchini. This stem is actually edible. I'm just going to cut the very, very end off where it might have been exposed to a little bit more dirt. These also, you definitely, oops, throwing vegetables around the room. You want to wash everything. You want to rinse the exterior of any of your vegetables, maybe except the onion because it's been kept in its lovely jacket for us this whole time. The zucchini I'm just going to cut into quick little half moons. So I just cut it lengthwise by keeping the tip of my knife on the cutting board and dragging it safely backwards. It's a lot safer that way than like trying to hack through it. Also, it's better for your knife than chopping at anything. You want to try to keep the knife tip of the knife on the cutting board whenever possible, actually, just because it's safer for you, you know where it is, and it's safer for the knife. So I'm just going to now chop in a downward motion. I call this my guillotine. Just keep chopping until I've got these kind of nice half-moon chunks. I cut these quite large, as you can see, because zucchini has a lot of water in it. It has a lot less fiber than some of the carrot and the maybe even the tomatoes are going to take a while, the eggplant. So we want to make sure that everything is cooking at around the same speed. If I cut these very small, they would be way overdone by the time everything else is cooked. So water content on vegetables is how we kind of determine how long it's going to take in the oven. Things like sweet potato and butternut squash, they take a lot longer. They're very, very fibrous, not as much water. To cut these bell peppers, you can cut it directly in half like I did on this one, and then I just use my hands and pull out the seed pod. Or the second way of cutting a bell pepper, equally efficient, and I actually do this second method more often. You can cut around the seed pod. So starting at the stem, take your knife down the side walls of the pepper, all the way around, cutting around that stem and the pith until you are left with not but the seed pod. So either way, you end up with similar effect. And all we're going to do with our bell pepper is cut it into a fairly large dice, like what you might see in like sweet and sour dishes, those kinds of big chunky vegetables. Fairly large chunk because again these will break down more than something that has a little bit more fiber to it. But they're still really, really good for us. And I happen to have orange and yellow because they were on sale. That is usually how I determine what kinds of, like if the recipe calls for spinach and I go to the store and the baby spinach in a bag just happens to be on sale this week, then that's what I'm going to be using. The bell peppers, for some reason, they have these yellow and orange marked down. They probably got a new shipment, so they kind of need to move their produce. And so that's what I'm using in my meal prep this week. Shopping practically is really helpful. You don't have to necessarily, if the recipe calls for a red bell pepper, but you get to the store and the green bell pepper is drastically cheaper, and that's something that's important in your lifestyle, then go for it. It's going to taste slightly different, but it's still going to be really good for you.
So Julia, we have a couple questions that I didn't catch. How long can you keep the marinade in the refrigerator?
At least 2 weeks, and it depends on the airtight container that you keep it in. If it's really well sealed and there can't be any kind of like growth right around the rim that can happen sometimes in containers, then even longer, up to a month. You just kind of got to reshake it again and pour it all over. The only thing that might start to go bad, it would be the fresh garlic, but that lasts a really long time when it's preserved in vinegar. So yeah, I would say 2 to 3 weeks.
And
If
that's
you
the
don't
one
use
great
it before
thing
then.
about like batch cooking, right? If you make these things in big quantities, you don't have to have that as part of your meal prep night after night. You can just grab what's in your fridge. There was another question about how long can you keep cut onions in the refrigerator? I've heard not to store cut onions as it grows bacteria faster compared to other vegetables, but I'm not sure if it's a myth.
I think that myth is probably held in truth only because there's so many gases that come out of onion, they break down very quickly. So once you do have very small onions, if they've been processed down into a small size, then they will break down just within a couple of days. Wasting your money and your time. So if you want to have some of your onions kind of partially prepped, what I like to do is I cut them in half, leaving that root end on. The root end is your friend. It will hold the whole onion together the whole time for you. But then cutting the other end off so that I can get my finger in there and peel the outer layer of the onion off. That outer layer is almost always kind of slimy or papery. You want to get that off. And then this is how I have onions kind of ready to go for myself for the week. I got maybe 2 of them ready to go, peeled and cut. And so at this point, it's only going to take me about 1 minute to chop it up. And that's because I paid a lot of money for knife skills in culinary school. But as you guys get better and better and practice more and more, it will only take you about a minute to chop your onion. And so having it kind of peeled and prepped and ready goes a long way to helping you in time. But yeah, that's a good thing to point out. Chopped onion is sort of one of the things that you don't want to do too far in advance. Other things will last a really long time.
There was another question about freezing the onions. I'm not sure. I guess it would depend on how you would use them, because wouldn't they get kind of soft once you de-thaw them?
Yeah, they would. So if you're planning to kind of roast them or cook them, you can do that. But it's recommended that you would sort of lightly blanch the onion before freezing. And so from that point on, you've got an already partially cooked onion. And so it would depend on what you would want to use it for. But I'm going to show you how to cut this onion really fast so that you don't even need to worry too much about doing it that far in advance. Once you've got the outer layer peeled off, and again, that root end is still on, the root end that grows with the hairy roots down into the ground, you want to leave that on, because I'll show you a dice and I'll show you a slice. To slice it, you just sort of follow the grooves of the onion all the way around, putting the tip of your knife in first and going around the onion, following those lines, and then you're going to just sort of cut it all away from the root. This recipe calls for your onion to be cut into wedges. You can cut it into large slices. You can cut it into dices. You can do whatever you want because it's your world. And so for that, that's just a good large slice of the onion. We're going to put that into this mix, but just as a quick demonstration, I'm going to show you this half of the onion, roots still attached. I'm going to cut in horizontally. My left hand splayed so that I always know where my fingers are, cutting into the flat cut side, but stopping short before I cut through the root end. I want to leave the root end attached. Then I'm going to turn the onion 90 degrees, and again, just following the grooves in the onion. Those nice lines are a good guide. You just follow as many of them around the whole curve of the onion. Again, I'm not cutting through the root end. I'm stopping about 1 centimeter short before I cut back. So it's all actually still attached to the root end and holding itself together nicely so that I don't have just onion all over the place. Now it's sort of like one of those weird bloomin' onion thingies, right? Okay, so then I've got those lines I'm going to cut straight across. And you have got nicely diced onion every single time. You can do small dice, large dice, cut all the way back to that root end, and all you're left with is the bit that you couldn't cut through. That goes into the compost. And this is the fastest and easiest way, safest also, to get your diced onions for whatever you want. Your salads, your salsas, your guacamole, your roasted veggies, omelets. The world is your oyster when you've got all of this delicious chopped flavor. So I'm gonna now just season this up. A little bit of olive oil, the rest of the olive oil that we didn't use before. I'm gonna toss all onto these delicious veggies. We wanna make sure that the vegetables are coated. And that really does mean coated well, like the whole veggie should have some good oil on it. But we don't want them to be swimming. We don't want to end up with a big pool of olive oil at the bottom of this bowl when we're done putting it out onto the sheet pan. So I'm just using olive oil. It's extra virgin olive oil, and this is dried Italian seasoning. It's also a great thing to have in your pantry. Somebody did all of the work for you. They mix the wonderful medley of herbs. It usually has oregano, basil, thyme, sometimes marjoram, maybe a little bit of red pepper flake. It's just a wonderful medley. So we're gonna add this and some garlic. The garlic I'm just smashing, and I want you to see how fun that is. Just literally put it underneath your flat side, and it helps you peel it. So I've got this garlic, need to peel it. I just smash it really good, get out some of that pent up frustration, and then the peel just comes off like a jacket. It's really a nice trick. If peeling garlic is tedious and annoying, so all you have to do is smash it to smithereens and the paper just comes right off. All right, so I'm just adding in a couple of cloves of smashed garlic. It's gonna roast up with all of our veggies really nicely. I'm going to use the best tools that you can have in the kitchen, hands. I'm just going to make sure that these veggies are kind of well coated. The oil and the seasoning gets down to everything on the bottom, but we can always address that too right on our sheet pan. I've got my sheet pans already lined with foil. My oven is a little small here in the kitchen, so I'm using 2 of what we call these quarter size sheet pans. And I'm just going to start mixing my veggies, seasoning everything, making sure there's a good medley of all of this deliciousness coming out onto each pan. So I'm not left with a big pool of stuff, but I do want to really make sure that I get all of that stuff, that all of that love and oil and herb and onion. We spent the time doing it. We want it to end up in our oven and then especially in our bellies. So make sure that it's all nicely coated. If you feel like you need to drizzle a little bit more oil, more than welcome. You do want to make sure that it's in as much of a flat layer as possible. And then we are going to add our marinated chicken. You can kind of nestle it in. Just gonna go kind of right on top. I'm gonna do one of these with 2 and the other one with my 3rd. There's a little bit of marinade still left in that bowl. We're not gonna waste that. I'm gonna drizzle that over both pans. And this magic is just gonna go right into the oven. Oh, it smells really good in here. Just the marinade and the herbs and the flavors kind of mixing together. It smells great. So this is gonna go in the oven, middle rack. The oven should be at 425. If you have a convection oven, which is one of the ones that has a fan in it, then your oven should be at 400. Convection ovens actually increase the temperature inside your oven by about 25 degrees. So 425 for a regular oven, 400 for a convection, and it's just gonna roast in there and be happy and full of love for about 30 to 35 minutes. If you're using chicken breast, it'll take a lot less time. Maybe you want to check it in 20 minutes because it's a high heat and you don't want it to turn into a dried out hockey puck. So I usually set my timer for partially through cooking. So if I'm looking at about a 30 to 35 minute roast, I'm going to check it at about 20 minutes. 2 reasons. I want to make sure that my timing, my brain is right, and that it is actually going to be done in about 30 to 35 minutes, get a general idea of what's going on inside the oven. But I also really want to make sure that it's cooking evenly. So I spin the trays around because the back of the oven is not as hot as the front of the oven, or this corner has a little hot spot versus that corner. Everybody's oven is different and none of them are calibrated perfectly. I would put money on it. So you want to kind of make sure that you're giving all of your chicken and veggies an equal shot, and spin that tray 180 degrees so the front is the back and the back is the front, and then let it finish cooking. That's what I do for any roasting or baking, whether it's cookies or cauliflower. So while that happens, I know that Amy probably has some great stuff that we should talk about.
Yeah, we had some really great questions too. There was one about buying organic vegetables, and I think, you know, if you have the money to spend on organic, that can be a wonderful thing. However, I think that research suggests that eating vegetables, whether they're organic or not organic, or fruits for that matter, it's better to eat more, right? And so if you can't afford the organic, that's okay. You still buy the regular, rinse it off well. There are certain vegetables that, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Dirty Dozen, for instance, or the Clean 15. There's an organization called the Environmental Working Group, and they put out a list every year. And so usually I tell people, you know, if you want to do some organic, but maybe can't do all organic, take a look at that list. Some of the things on it are like apples, strawberries, tomatoes, potatoes, kale, spinach. Those are some of the ones that typically are found on that list of the Dirty Dozen. And so you might consider doing those organic. But to be honest with you, I don't know that it makes a huge difference. As far as nutrients go, they're probably pretty equivalent. As far as, you know, wanting to watch pesticides and things like that, you know, you're probably better off with an organic, if you can.
Yeah, I will chime in there though, and there's nothing wrong with anything that you just said, absolutely correct, but I want everyone to know, and this isn't like an attack on organic farms in any way, because they are usually smaller farms who are trying to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly, but they also use pesticides. They just use organic approved treatments. So they're still using insecticides, they're still using different sprays. If you find a farm that doesn't use anything at all to protect their crop, then please introduce them. That's rare. It is very rare, and if you can afford that and you know of that farm, then fantastic. But yeah, it is usually the ones that Amy mentioned, the ones that you eat the skin, you eat directly without like removing a peel. Like an orange, you take the peel off. It's a little bit different. So.
Yeah, and I don't typically buy, I don't buy a lot of organic. If, you know, just, I eat a lot of produce and I wash it well, and that's about it. There was also a question about, do you flip the meat when you rotate the pan?
No. Good question. Really good question. If you're using chicken breast or skinless meat, or if you were substituting fish or pork or beef, then no, still no. And I'll tell you why. Just because in this recipe for this concept, it's a roast, and so we want what has been exposed to the air and the heat to continue roasting. If you flip it, then what was on top that got nice and crispy and roasty and good is going to then become wet and soggy and steamy by placing it back on the bottom, and what was on the bottom, which is kind of soggy and steamy and wet, is not going to really dry out enough and roast quite well. When you're roasting, you just you leave it. Even vegetables, you kind of just leave it. You don't need to stir it. You don't really want to mess around with it. The bits of the veggies that have surface contact with the pan are going to caramelize really nicely because of that reaction with the heat and the surface. And you want to leave that. You want to let that happen, because that's how you develop that extra flavor. And the more you stir it, the more everything just becomes steamy rather than developing that caramelization.
Great
and that
question.
happens. Meat too. Yeah, really good question. There are, I guess, certain applications for flipping something once it's cooking in the oven, but not usually just a straightforward roast, which is what this is.
Yeah, and just, I wanted to mention a few things about the wonderful colored vegetables, the variety that we that Julia used, right? So the colors come from the phytochemicals and the phenols in the fruits, right? That gives them their color, and they are powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatories, also very high in fiber. So like, for instance, the eggplant, high in fiber, potassium, vitamin C, all of these things help to support our immune health, and even maybe prevent cancer and cognitive decline because they're high in these phenols. Garlic, right? Been used for millennium, right? And so not only does it give our food great flavor, but it's also a powerful antioxidant. And studies have shown that it may actually protect against heart disease, reduce inflammation and infection, boost immunity, lower blood pressure. So when you can include these fresh vegetables in your diet, I think most of us know, you might be familiar with the My Plate, where like half of our plate should be coming from vegetables or fruits. And so really the more you can incorporate those, and variety I think is hugely important. You may have heard like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And while apples are great, right, we actually, the more variety you have in your diet, the more diverse nutrients that you're getting, right? And so incorporating like a wide variety is really important. The bell peppers are really high in vitamin C. A lot of people don't realize that they have 169% of the vitamin C. They're also a really great source of potassium. Cherry tomatoes, did you use cherry tomatoes too?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and as much potassium in 10 cherry tomatoes as you'll find in a medium banana. So lots of wonderful ingredients in this recipe. And one of the great things about it for a busy weeknight is it's all on one pan. Also, I think when you do a big sheet pan like this, you can actually use it throughout the week, right? You might have it for this meal, but you could also throw it into a bowl for lunch, right? With maybe you cook up a batch of quinoa or brown rice, or you have a little chicken left over from tonight's meal that you can use in a bowl. So I think all those things go a long way to making the prep a little bit easier. Let's see.
Yeah, and I can tell you, like, even I spend my life prepping and cooking, and I do love it more than anything. But after 12 hours of cooking for other people, the last thing that I want to do when I get home is chop anything else ever again. I can't tell you, before I started meal prepping and at least doing this partial prep concept where, you know, the onion is peeled and ready to go, the bell peppers are already chopped, the brown rice is already made, things like that, so that when I get home I can have dinner ready in 10 minutes. Before I started doing that, I just ate a lot of cereal, a lot of air pop popcorn, a lot of whatever it is that would take 5 minutes for me to make while I was, you know, taking a shower. And so this is a much healthier and much more delicious version of that same concept.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, for a lot of my clients, it's really a matter of planning, right? So if we have a plan in place, it's so much easier at the end of a busy day. You don't have to think at that point, right? You come home, you know what you're making for dinner that night. You already bought the ingredients maybe over the weekend. You can sort of, when you're picking what recipes you're making or what meals you're making, you can kind of what I call piggyback. So maybe one night you're having chicken like this as a roasted piece of chicken, but you're making enough that then you can use it for fajitas one night, right? Or another meal. So you don't have to cook chicken every night. Or if you know you are buying some baby spinach for a recipe and it doesn't call for the whole bag, can you find another way to use it later in the week, right? And so when you're planning out what you're going to make, you kind of decide what you're having throughout the week based on some of the other ingredients that maybe you're having to buy. Helps to reduce food waste, helps to save you time, even though you have to invest in the planning part, right? Maybe carve out a half an hour to an hour on the weekend to make a list. Then it's kind of smooth sailing throughout the week. It makes it a lot easier.
Really goes a long way. And when you find things that maybe you love, your roommates, your partners, your kids, whomever, then doing those different meal prep ingredients, having them kind of ready to go, and then finding different ways to use them. You know, I know when I was a kid, my mom realized I liked broccoli, so there was broccoli on every plate. But it didn't feel like I was just eating plain broccoli next to my food every day. She kind of found ways to incorporate the broccoli because it was literally the only green thing that I would eat. But you do that for yourselves. We don't really grow out of that. You have to kind of trick yourself to eat things that you don't necessarily love, or you've got extra spinach. What am I going to do with it today? Those kinds of things. But having just that tiny bit of foresight, right? Like Amy is saying, and kind of thinking about what you can do with it, it makes the week so much easier to get through.
And you can really, like for the broccoli, for instance, you can throw it into a stir fry. You can put it in your pasta sauce. There's so many different ways to use it, right? And oftentimes we may have recipes that, you know, it doesn't maybe call for a vegetable in the pasta sauce, but you can add anything. You can add some more mushrooms, onions, zucchini, any of the things really that we are using in this recipe tonight would be wonderful. And so I often look for like ways to just add additional vegetables to a recipe, even if it doesn't call for it, or larger quantities, right? Sometimes they say, put in, you know, 2 handfuls of spinach. Well, I might put in 4. It cooks down to almost nothing anyway. So, you know, finding ways to add it in, even to some of the things that you're already doing. And I think there's also no shame in buying like pre-cut. I never cut a squash anymore, right? Or butternut squash. I almost always buy it cut up in the bag. So there are ways to make things easier. And I say, you know, if it helps you get dinner on the table, do it, right? Go for it. We know that family meals are so important to just health and well-being, especially like maybe your family are the only people you're really seeing these days, right? So to have a time to sit down together and visit, we know that it helps kids academically. We know that it helps them have greater vocabulary. It helps decrease the rates of depression and teenage pregnancy. There's all sorts of benefits of family meals. So even if it's just, you know, it's something you put together really quickly, having a family meal is better than not.
Yeah, really amazing, amazing tip there. And this is just one of those recipes that you can actually have the kids help you. Have them help toss the veggies with some of the sauce, have them help lay things out on the sheet pan, getting them involved in the kitchen, cooking healthy food from a young age. I can promise you it will have good benefits for the rest of their lives. So
yeah, the more you can get them involved, the more likely they're going to want to try it. Especially if you get them in the garden.
Yes, I never wanted to eat certain fruits, and then I became a chef, and learning how to cut them and process them and put them on something pretty is like, oh, of course I'm going to eat it. Well, I made it, so I have to try it. And it works on 7-year-olds too, I promise. So I'm going to show before we run out of time so that we can address any other questions or things that pop up if people want to last, but I know we're down to about 5 minutes. One of the last things that I really like to make sure that people understand, it takes an extra 30 seconds, but thinking about how you present your food to yourself and to your family goes a really long way to making you want to eat it. You've worked hard to make the food look good or at least taste good. And so putting it out on a plate and not just eating it over your trash can like I tend to eat my meals is really important to making yourself remember that you're special, because you're the most important person that you could be cooking for, and it really goes a long way to convincing kids or other people to eat something that they might not normally want to try. It's how we in the industry sell food. We make it sound really pretty on a menu, and then we present it to you really fancy on a plate, and you're going to spend all kinds of money on it, right? So doing that for yourself makes you more interested in eating the food that you just made. So I'm sorry to step off camera here really quick.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you on one of these sheet pans. I think, can you see here? Yeah. We are looking for really good brown caramelization happening on the chicken, especially if you've left the skin on. I've got a nice caramelization happening on all of my veggies. You can see some browning on the carrots. The mushrooms and zucchini have lost a lot of their water and are roasty. The biggest telltale for the veggies are the cherry tomatoes. We just toss those in whole. So as long as they've kind of burst, that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna burst, they're gonna kind of shrivel, they're gonna get really juicy and delicious. That is good. Don't think you've done anything wrong if all your tomatoes have popped. That's exactly what you're looking for. And so a nice little close up there of our delicious roasted Italian veggies with a browned chicken thigh coated in balsamic. I'm going to get the other pan out, but I wanted to just kind of talk really quickly while we were talking. I put the rest of the marinade that I had, everything from that jar, into my small pot, and I reduced it on a medium-high heat. I didn't ever let it boil over, but it was on a very rapid cook the whole time, and it only took about 2 minutes for it to reduce by half. All of the water content has cooked out, and it's now like a really nicely reduced balsamic and oil dressing. So that's going to be my sauce. The recipe, when you get it, you'll see it also comes with a little note section down below for a recipe for orzo pasta. You can make the orzo pasta with any kind of pasta, like a whole grain pasta, which would be great. I'm sure Amy would support that decision. But orzo is a really nice small pasta. It looks like rice. It cooks really fast, and it's just kind of a nice use for salads. And so if you make this delicious garlic parmesan orzo pasta, you put that on the side here with your delicious roasted veggies. You top that with our amazingly browned balsamic roasted chicken. And then I'm going to drizzle some of my delicious, now reduced balsamic marinade, which is sort of half of a glaze, half of a sauce. And I want that to spill over the veggies and the chicken so that it's going to absorb all of that really delicious condensed flavor. Maybe you could get a couple of splatters and fancy drops on your plate. Boom.
Looks
Delicious.
great.
Oh, I really wish you guys could
Beautiful.
smell that if you are cooking along, or when you do make this recipe. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you let me know, or send us a general group email. I really want to know how this turns out for everybody. I get into the sheet pan revolution too, because you can throw anything on there basically. There's 1,000,000,001 recipes online. Just make sure they've got 4 stars or more, and then have fun.
We do have one last question that was asked earlier about not crying when you cut onions.
Good question. I'm sure everyone will love this. Okay. You can put your onions in the fridge for about 5 to 10 minutes before cutting them. That will help slow down the release of the gas when you start to chop them. You can also have a fan or an open window right next to where you're cooking, because if you have ventilation moving the air in front of your face, then the gases won't be able to get right into your eyeballs. You can wear contact lenses like me and you feel nothing. Or honestly, those kind of chemistry goggles, like lab goggles, they will help a lot. You might feel silly, but they really, really do work. So if you have a high sensitivity, then don't be ashamed. Put on some chemistry lab goggles and they'll help you a lot. But try all 3 of those things too if you're really, really sensitive to it. If you wear contacts, then you're the person in the kitchen who's going to cut the 50-pound bag of onions every Monday because your boss finds out that you don't cry. So that's what happened to me. That's a really good question, though, and I hope that helps, because those little tricks really do help with the chopping of the onions. But then the faster that you get at chopping it, when you can cut it really quickly and put it away, then you'll beat the gas to the punch. If I know that we're a little like a minute over time, but if anybody did have any other questions, I'm not going to chase you away. We really do want to be a resource to everyone, but if I know everyone has things that they probably have to run off to do. So Kathleen, if you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia and Amy. I think everyone on the call can agree with me as well that we're really appreciative of your time and your knowledge, and we have learned a lot from just observing you through this hour. So thank you both for being here. We are at the hour, so this concludes the end of our webinar, but thank you, Julia, for hopping on if folks have additional questions, or staying on if folks have additional questions and want to stay for that. But otherwise, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. I will be sending out all the information for the recipe and the video after this. So you'll have that information too, and just look out for more information from us in regards to our future wellness webinars. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Be sure to
Thank you.
check out our website too. I put it in the chat. There's lots more recipes just like this one there.
Perfect. Thank you,
Thanks.
Amy. And I'll put that in the follow-up email as well so they have it.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, Kate. Thank you, Kathleen, for having us. Like I said,
Yeah,
I'll
thank
still be
you.
here for a couple of minutes. If anybody has a desperate question, please go ahead and type it in. We'll wait until the last of you have gone on your day. But thank you again for joining us in the kitchen. This was so much fun to be a part of.
Lots of fun.
Thank
I am
you.
going to stop the recording now. Thank you, guys.